So good afternoon, everyone. And today we have amongst us Nikhil Kamath. So if I may ask my friends that what does chess and startups have in common? So I would say a lot really when it comes to our guest of honor, Mr. Nikhil Kamath, the co-founder of Zerodha and True Beacon. Thank you, Nikhil, for being here. And before I introduce you, I really need to catch my breath. And before that, I would like to introduce my mentors and my organization. Our mentors, Mr. Bishnu Dhanuka and Mr. Sanjay Bhavania, have been game changers for more than 5,000 women over the past 28 years. They started this unique organization, Millennium Mams, so that women could truly be independent by giving them knowledge on financial literacy and capital markets. A big thank you, sirs, for this immeasurable contribution. When most of us were preparing for our board exams, 15-year-old Nikhil decided he wanted to represent India in chess. Great move, perhaps the next Vishwanathan Anand? Not really, because at the age of 17, he started equity trading. I guess that is what they call checkmate, perhaps. At 19, he decided that he wanted to manage the portfolios of HNIs or high net worth individuals and co-founded Kamath Associates. Is there anything more to accomplish at such a young age? Of course there is. Co-founding Zerodha at age of 23 in 2010 with his brother Nitin. With more than 3 million orders daily, $10 billion in daily turnover, doubling the customer base every 2 years, Zerodha is valued at a whopping $1 billion. I told you, I do need to catch my breath, really. And the icing on the cake, Zerodha is self-funded. Yes, you heard me right. Zerodha won the Bootstrap Champ ET Startup Awards in 2016, Startup of the Year 2020, because Zerodha believes in building lean teams and the right attitude. True Beacon was born in 2019 for providing advice to ultra HNIs using a zero fee model. How is it possible? Nikhil, we really don't know how is it possible. So now I would like to welcome Nikhil and to our Millennium Mams Forum and request you to share your entrepreneurial journey with us and how you could make the right moves being so passionate about chess. So Nikhil, we are all ears and over to you. Please address our forum and share your experience with us.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction, Rachna. I think everything sounds cooler in the media because it's always exaggerated. Firstly, I recognize a lot of people on the panel. I went around scrolling and I know a few of them.
Yes, thanks to Beena, thanks to Kudrat. Beena connected me and Kudrat coordinated and they are members of Millennium Mams.
Yeah, many more actually outside of these two too.
Okay, you know more people, right?
Yeah. So firstly, let me take your chess question. So chess is a much smaller representation of intelligence. Chess is a game which is more about memory. Chess requires for you to read every game which has happened in history, learn theory about openings, middle game, end games, and your ability to go back and recall which game was played how is what makes somebody a better chess player. So I think more than being smart or intelligent, a better metric for a good chess player would be a great memory, I think. In terms of how we started off, much before all of this began, I used to study in a school in Bangalore, actually many years ago.
Mhm.
My dad worked for a bank. He was a Canara Bank manager, which required for him to shift to different cities once every 3 years. So I moved around with him, lived in places like Karnal in Haryana, lived in Delhi, lived in a place called Shimoga in Karnataka. Before I came back to Bangalore again when I was about 10 years old. I joined a school in Bangalore in JP Nagar. I don't know how many of you are from Bangalore, and I don't know how many
Lot
from
of them.
South.
Lot of them. We have a chapter there, so a lot of them have joined from Bangalore.
Yeah. It's a tiny little school in JP Nagar, which is like a area in South Bangalore.
Okay.
Went to school from fourth grade to the halfway eighth, ninth grade in Bangalore. Meanwhile, while I was going to school, I had started playing a lot of chess. Chess is very incremental in nature. You first play inter-school competitions, you win them, and then you play state level, then you play national level, then you play for the country, and you get to go around the world representing the country and stuff like that. So I played all levels of chess, quit going to school, attempted to become a chess player. Between the ages of 14 to 16, I was fairly serious, I think.
Mm.
Uh, Came upon the realization that there are many more talented people out there when I played with the really gifted chess players, right? I mean, every industry has some of those people like, Sachin Tendulkar or something. You're like born to play cricket. There are people who are born to play chess. And
Yeah.
I realized chess might not be the thing for me. It's a very competitive sport in its own way. And unless you're in the top five in the world, you can't really make a living out of chess. Stopped chess, got a job in a call center when I was about 17, got into trading the markets a little bit at around the same time. Many experiences, many businesses attempted and failed. I still remember at one point I had started a laundry shop and a medical store and a
Oh,
phone
wow.
business and a textile business. Very many things, whatever
Mhm.
as a 17, 18-year-old guy with the limited earnings you have from the salary you get from a call center and the little bit of money you have made from trading,
Mhm.
I think I tried and attempted as many different things as I could. Uh, Trading again, like many other things in life, I think Kudrat was telling me just before the session began that you guys are typically value investors, very much the school of thought of, say, a Benjamin Graham or Warren Buffett, and
Yes,
I'm assuming
absolutely.
a vast majority of you actually are. The problem with trading is when you start with a significant corpus of capital and you're happy to earn 10% or 20% a year kind of returns, those kind of methodologies work. But I was starting with minuscule capital. The only way for me to make a living out of trading
Mhm.
was to grow it at a pace which is significantly larger than the 10, 20%.
Mhm.
So with trading, uh, I began trading derivatives at the very beginning. So it was a lot of options, futures, essentially instruments of leverage, wherein you could make 5 times the returns or make 5 times the losses. Much like anybody who uses a lot of leverage, I burnt out many times. I think I must have lost my capital at least 4 or 5 times with the usual disappointment which goes with losing money. I think
Mhm.
especially when you begin a career in investing or trading, your emotions are very closely attached to what happens to the money that you're investing. If you lose money today, you have a terrible day today. And
Mhm.
if you make money today, you're a happy person for the next 1 or 2 days. So I
Short
had
term.
a,
Short term happiness.
yeah, by short term, I would say as short term as, like 8 hours, one day, that kind of happiness and sorrow. That happened for a few years between 17 to 19, 20. I think it was a lot of making money quickly and losing money
Mhm.
even more quickly.
Mhm.
Uh, Along the way, I think one of the best teachers, more than the colleges you might go to or the books you might read, The best teacher in the stock markets is the market itself. When you actually pay attention, watch the tape, and listen to how people are reacting, at the end of the day, fundamentals don't drive prices as much as emotions might. A stock typically goes up when there are more people buying and less people selling, and people can stay irrational for really, really, really long. You know, you can't bank on either fundamental analysis or technical analysis. So my focus very organically drifted towards analyzing the sentiment around stock markets. I think it became about which promoter is doing what with his holdings in a company. What is a foreign hedge fund which has a great track record doing with a certain company in India? What geopolitical news might affect the outcome of a certain industry over the next 5 or 10 years? Or even as simple as what are people on TV saying? Like, you know, the people who give tips on TV are generally always wrong. So I think a great strategy, it's quite strange when you say it, but if you were to track every call that has been given on TV by CNBC or ET or any of these news channels, and you were to have done the exact opposite, you would have made money. So there are many tiny nuances which help you gauge the sentiment of what is happening in the market and what people are perceiving at that time. Uh, a different trading strategy, a different way of analysis will work for different people. In my journey, I've had the sentimental analysis kind of journey. I had a 2 3 year phase where I would swear by technical analysis. I would read everything from a candlestick, Steve Nielsen's books, or be it a Fibonacci sequence of numbers or MACD or whatever technical indicators were in the news back then. I had a fundamental phase where I would research the company's earnings. I would go through everything the company is doing, get on management calls, try to talk to the promoters. I had a few years of that. I had a few years of the whole quantitative trading methods wherein I would run about mathematical correlations, write algorithms to take advantage of short-term inefficiencies. That game comes down to latency. And at the end of the day, you're trying to reduce the number of hops between the order origination and the order execution. The person who can reduce the most number of hops gets the fastest execution and in return a better alpha on their portfolio. It becomes more about how many times you catch that 5 bips or 10 bips on a trade versus calling the direction of the market. So for me today, I mean, I still truly believe that nobody really understands or can predict with any consistency what might happen in a year from now or tomorrow or 1 month or whatever time frame. We're all weighing our opinions based on the news that we have at hand, and we're wrong as often as we are right. But in my journey along the way, I have a bunch of parameters which I think I can cope well with. And my systems of trading are derived from my experiences of the last 15, 17 years, however long I've been trading. So, I mean, I would love for this conversation to be two-way because,
Absolutely,
like you said, you all are investors yourself.
yes. Yeah. So I have Namita, my colleague. She will be moderating the Q&A, and we'll take the questions from our members. Namita.
Hi, Nikhil.
Hi, Namita.
Nikhil, better alphas. Isn't that what we're all chasing in the market? You seem to have perfected it.
Well, I think we've gotten lucky for a long time. It's more like it.
Nikhil, I was really curious. You described Zerodha as a disruptive revenue model. Can you kind of, I know that's there on your LinkedIn profile as well. So can you kind of elaborate that? Because that seems to have disrupted the industry.
I mean, on LinkedIn and media pages, we all have to say stuff like that. You know, I think they look for words like disruptive, innovative, path-breaking. So we end up saying words like that.
He's being
very modest.
No, in all fairness, I think when we started Zerodha, it's been 11 years now, when we actually went to market, everybody in the market charged a percentage brokerage. So if you bought shares worth 1 crore, you would pay maybe, I don't know, 50,000, 1 lakh rupee, 2 lakh rupees as brokerage, depending on who your broker was and what kind of a service you were availing. What we did at Zerodha is we realized in the business of broking, it does not matter to me as a broker if you buy 1 share or if you buy 1 million shares, because I'm just your path to reaching the exchange and exchange's order matching engine. So we said it doesn't matter to us if a client is buying X or Y and different quantums of X or Y. So we said we'll charge a flat fee of 20 rupees, immaterial of how many shares you buy, what contract you want to trade in. And the professional traders of the time who paid lakhs and crores in brokerage that at that point really liked that model. And they all switched to us. One of the best things about Zerodha has been that we have never had to do any marketing. We have never put out an ad, or we have never had a salesperson cold call someone and say, sign on to our platform. I think the reason why we were able to do that is the professional traders, or the traders who make their living out of trading, found us very early, and they act as the influencers of this industry. The retail audience typically mimics what the professionals are doing.
All right. I'd like to bring in Meghna at this point. Meghna?
Yeah. Hi, Nikhil. Firstly, congrats on being such a great startup. And I will ask you, our name Zerodha itself is very interesting, and I found that it means zero barriers. Fantastic
does, yeah.
name. So
we didn't come up
with regard to that, what were the barriers? Oh, okay. Well, credit goes to whoever came up with it. It's a very nice sounding name.
Yeah.
And so talking about barriers, what were the barriers that you faced when you founded Zerodha? Could you share your journey about that for a bit for us?
I would summarize Zerodha by saying it's a bunch of accidents which worked in our favor. Our intention was never to go out and create a broking firm. We were traders, me and Nitin, and we used to spend a lot of money on brokerage, paying different brokers across the country. Okay. Our intention was we'll go to the exchange, we'll get a membership, and then we'll save all this money we are paying in brokerage. That's how Zerodha started. Once we did that and we started saving money for ourselves, we had people we knew who were also traders. They said, even we want to do the same thing, but maybe we all don't need to get a license. We'll use Zerodha as a platform and clear our transactions through you. I think everything that happened after that has been one accident after another. The good thing about Zerodha is because we don't have external investors, because we don't have to run every new idea by a team of 10 people who have to say it's okay, we have the ability to change and evolve very quickly. So we are very receptive to what our client base, our audience wants. And when they tell us that, on your order window, if there's a chart and I want to place my buy and sell orders on the chart, we can just go out and do it in 3 days versus having to go through the typical processes a corporate might have to go through. I think that makes us very nimble, and that makes Zerodha significantly different from the, it made us different from the incumbents back then, the Sher Khans and ICICI and HDFC. It also makes us different from the startups today because they all have a cap table filled with investors and venture capital companies and PE funds.
Thank you for that, Nikhil.
Thank you, Meghna.
Sunanda? Okay, I think she's having a problem. I'll call in Harshita.
Okay. Sunanda, you're unmuted now.
Yeah,
you can talk.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, Nikhil. Actually, I have been very fascinated by Zerodha for a very different reason. I first heard about you about 4 to 5 years ago. That to a person who chanced upon your platform because he wanted some clarification on taxation laws as far as options trading went.
Right.
And in fact, he has constantly used your platform for clarifying various, doubts they have. So what has fascinated me is that how have you used your, platform for something for people to learn? Because even when I went through it today, it wasn't that, you only want members of your platform to, have access to those kind of articles and knowledge. So how did you come up with that?
Yeah, sure. So the problem in the industry today is not, Zerodha going after ICICI's clients or ICICI going after HDFC. The problem is the ecosystem is very small in India. About 5% of our population has direct or indirect access to the stock markets. This number in the West, say in America, for instance, would be 95%. So our problem is not how to poach another broker's client, but how to increase the size of the ecosystem. And the only way we can get new people into the stock markets, new people to participate in India's whole financial ecosystem, education is the only way. So we always make whatever education pieces, whatever pieces of financial literacy we can make available. We have people in-house who write these. We put this out for everybody to view. And if more people, learn a bit more about the stock markets and come into the market, it doesn't matter which broker, which investment advisor they use, at least the ecosystem is growing. That is the intention with it.
Okay.
Nikhil, I had a question. Zerodha has seen a 41% jump in the number of clients in the recent past, with the number of women clients on the platform having gone up phenomenally. What is happening, Nikhil? Decode this for us.
I have to ask you guys, why are you not investing? Do you all have a trading account? You should be the best people to tell me that. I mean, so what does happen is, I think 16% is the number, 16 to 18%. So 1 out of every 6 people who open an account is traditionally female. I think that has to change. I wouldn't be wrong. I wouldn't be totally wrong in saying outside of the affluent in India, outside of the upper middle class and above, we still live in a society which is some form of patriarchy. I think the men in the household still retain control over the finances of the household. And the upper middle class and above is a very small portion of our entire population. I think as people do better and as there is a higher proportion of women who's getting educated, more women who are independent, I think that number will trickle down and this ratio will go up as well.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in Harshita from our Bangalore chapter. She may be somebody you know, Nikhil.
Of course I do.
Nikhil.
I haven't seen her in so long. Good.
Yes, been long. How are you doing?
Good, very good.
Great. So my question is partly answered with Sunanda's question. It was about your app Versity. So I'll ask you something else.
Yeah.
Rachna mentioned that you took up handling portfolios of people at age 19. Did you encounter any pushback because of your age?
Of course, yeah. So there are 1 of 2 ways that this can go, I'll give you an example. If you drop out in the 3rd year of engineering, it's not cool. But if you drop out in the 9th grade, it's very cool. So you have to sell what works for you. So 19 is okay. 19 is still that point where, here's this kid who's doing wealth management. There must be something interesting about it. But the same thing at 25 is no longer cool. So I think being young also helps as much as it takes away. So it was a novelty in its own way,
I'm glad it worked out for you.
A marketing whiz along with being a financial whiz, isn't it? It works. Thank you for the tips, Nikhil.
And one has to be a dropout to create a story, right?
Yeah, it has become so cool, right? I know people who have gone to college who are claiming to be dropouts now. It just works.
Neha, would you like to come in with your question?
Yes, thank you, Namita. Hi, Nikhil.
Hi.
I'd like to know how your new venture TrueBeacon different from the traditional asset management company, and what kind of transparency do you offer your clients?
Sure. So I'll give you the origin story. I personally was trying to buy third-party wealth funds. I have a private bank I deal with. I was trying to buy global sovereign funds through them and a whole bunch of different products. What I came to realize while allocating money myself is most of these guys they're not manufacturers. They don't make any product. So if I go to a Standard Chartered bank, for instance, they would in turn refer me to a third-party mutual fund or some kind of a fund across the world, and they would charge me a 1 or 2% fee just to refer me to that person. Now, when my money hits the fund they recommended, the fund manager would charge me 1% to set up the fund. Now, after that, they would charge me a 2% annual fee, immaterial of the fact if I made money, I lost money, I could lose 20% this year, but he would still charge me 2%. Then there would be lock-ins. If I put my money today and I need it in 2 months, I can't take it out. Or if I have to pay them exit loads, which are another 1%, 2% fees and fine. So I came to realize that when I'm investing 100 rupees, the fund manager at the very end of this process, because of all these inefficiencies, is only getting 95, 96 rupees. And the odds of a fund manager starting at 95 when my investment has been 100, the odds of him outperforming the benchmark mathematically in my mind are very low. So what we decided is, rather than crying about this problem and trying to really research and find out if there is a fund which does not have all this, we decided to build a fund asset management company ourselves. So with TrueBeacon, we don't have distributors, we don't have middlemen. It's direct to client only. We don't do any marketing, branding, so people have to find us. We don't go looking for them. We don't have a setup cost. We are an open-ended fund. You can come in when you want. You can go out when you want. We don't charge you the 2% a year at all. Annual charges are 0, no statutory fees whatsoever. If you put in 100 into TrueBeacon, all 100 goes into the fund. And at the end of the year, if the 100 becomes 110, we charge 1 as fee. So we take 10% of the profits the client will make. In my mind, it's a very client-aligned model. If the client doesn't make money for 3 years, TrueBeacon has 0 revenue. So it's a big incentive for the fund manager to go out there, really work for the client and deliver returns. I think that makes TrueBeacon significantly different. And in terms of compliance and governance, the industry was very murky and opaque. So we said we will not do any of the accounting ourselves. We hired Ernst & Young to do all of the accounting. We said we are fund managers. We don't want to hold on to client capital. So we made HDFC Bank the custodian who holds on to the capital. People would typically in this domain tell you what the value of your money is once in a month when they send you a report. We said we'll build a dashboard wherein on a daily basis you can log in. You can see where your money has been invested, what is the value of your money. You can add, subtract money, whatever you want to do online without having to call a relationship manager who will then try to convince you not to take out your money. We wanted to remove all that muck. So essentially, TrueBeacon has been an attempt to do that. The first 2 funds that we have are long short funds. So typically, the goal of these funds is to beat whatever the Nifty does by 6 to 8%. Traditionally, the Nifty has done about 10%. We are trying to get the 16 to 18% reward with considerably lower risk than being invested in Nifty vanilla by virtue of having a bucket in the portfolio, which is based on mathematics. These are algorithms which do delta hedging, run strategies on correlation, mean regression, everything that takes advantage of volatility spikes in the short run. That's about 30-40% of the portfolio. The other 60% of the portfolio, money goes into large cap Nifty companies only. We don't do any mid cap companies, small cap companies, none of that. So this has been our attempt, our first attempt to see if we can make a difference in the asset management industry. So let's see, it's very early. We've only been...
It's been a year, right? It's
we've been
almost
live for
a year
a
now.
year. Yeah, it's been a year just now, actually. Last week was our 1-year anniversary.
And is there a prerequisite for this or any entry barrier?
So this, again, we're not looking to go after mass. This is a very niche clientele. So we manage, say, the personal finances of people like Uday Kotak, Nandan Nilekani, people who are promoters of large cap companies. We started off with the intention of taking a minimum of 7 to 14 crores as an investment. But to us, it's less about the amount of money a client is putting in versus the quality of their client, how strategic he is. Like a promoter of a large private bank in India is the best place for intelligence when you're also investing in private banks in India. So we look at the type of client versus the amount of money they're coming in with. There have been cases where we have even taken 1 crore from a certain client.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Rachna?
Yeah. Nikhil, I would like you to request you to talk a little bit about the sectors, like what are the sectors you are focusing, and like, post-COVID, what do you think, like, few sectors, if you could talk about, who are going to be disrupted or the sectors who have future post-COVID?
Sure. So see, one of the big issues in India is the really innovative companies are not on the stock markets. We have a lot of legacy businesses which are listed, companies which have gone to the public to raise capital. But all the cool, innovative companies from the last decade have gone the private market route. They've raised their capital from PEs, venture capital companies, funds across the world. There are a couple of reasons as to why this happens. In India, the norms for listing on the public markets are very arcane. I think a company still spends as much as 5 to 8% as the market cap of that company in just getting the company listed. And there's a lot of red tape. You have to be profitable for a number of years. You have to have a certain kind of board. You have to have a certain kind of people on your board. There's a whole bunch of rules which makes it really inefficient for a company to list on the public markets. Mm-hmm. I think that needs to change. So the Olas and the Swiggies and the Flipkarts of our universe actually come to the stock market and list. I heard Zomato's listing sometime soon and some other companies. So hopefully something is changing. Mm-hmm. Amongst the companies that we do have, I think the best play, the pseudo play for technology and innovation, strangely enough, is an oil and refining company, Reliance, which is now doing a whole bunch of other things. Yeah. Even after the rally, even after how much it has run up, I would not be politically right in saying this, but from the political ecosystem's point of view, India is becoming much like a Russia of the 90s, when they had, I wouldn't call it crony capitalism, but they had oligarchs and they had a czar. People in proximity to power and people who were very large continue to get larger in the preceding decade. I think we might be not in as bad a situation as Russia back then, but at some level, I think the biggest companies in India right now will be the companies which will grow the most over the next 10 years for a whole host of reasons. So I would still continue to back. Hence, I said in our fund, we only do Nifty companies. I would stick to the 50 largest companies in the country. Reliance I like because of what it is pivoting to be. I think if they control the amount of data that one might perceive them to in the next few years, they would find many other areas of monetization which we haven't thought of up until now. In the tech space, I really like Infosys. Infosys I've had a long relationship with. Most of the founders of the company are my friends and neighbors and people who are ethically very sound. I think Infosys is one of the few companies where I know they had the whistleblower nonsense last year, be it whatever it was, but they're still a very ethical board, a very ethically run company with their models in the right place. If for nothing else, I buy Infosys for that reason alone. What else do I like? In the new companies that I like, I really like Bombay Stock Exchange. It's a very funny company. In terms of the technology, this is a company I understand very, very well because I'm in the industry. I know everybody from the BSE. I know everybody from the NSE. NSE commands a valuation which is over 10, 20 times of what BSE does by virtue of the amount of volume that happens on the National Stock Exchange. Exchange's revenue is the turnover tax or the transaction charge you guys as retail audience pay each time you buy and sell a share. They charge about 200 rupees per crore of transaction that you do. BSE right now has fallen to this point wherein they have great technology. They have a great management team, not the worst board in the world, but they have room to unlock so much. They have the potential to unlock so many different avenues of their business, which they seem to be going towards right now. And it's a very, very reasonably valued company when you talk about price multiples as well. So BSE is something I really, really like. So I said what? Reliance, I said Infosys, I said BSE. What do I not like? I don't like the real estate names at all across the globe. The problem in India is we still consider, we're not rational when we think about real estate. If I'm buying a home I want to live in, it's a bit like when people get married or when people have kids, you know, like, I don't think people think about it rationally. Residential real estate in India right now rents at about 1.5–2%. To any person who is going in to buy real estate right now, if I was doing a barter between buying a home for 100 or renting it at 1 rupee 50 paisa per year for the foreseeable future, mathematically it makes so much more sense to rent. But culturally, we have been taught to own real estate. Renting is a taboo in India even today. And I think that dichotomy between renting and buying, the difference in yield and the value of property has to come down at some point. That is my case for residential real estate. When it comes to commercial real estate, I'll give you my own example. I had a sales office with 800 people on a very busy road in Bangalore. People living 3 kilometers away would spend 1.5 hours in traffic getting there and getting back. And outside of the time spent in traffic, you're in between, you know, buses honking and traffic and people and hums and ditches and a whole bunch of things which really affect the rest of your day. That 1.5 hours you spend getting tortured. So we've kind of shut down that office completely. All of those 800 people are working at home. They are more efficient at home. It's good for the world. It's good for the climate. And most importantly, it's good for business because you save on infrastructure costs. Your people are more productive. They're not spending time in traffic. They're spending that same time doing better work. So I see a case for many other companies following in that direction. I think 100% work from home might never be a reality, but to have 50% of your staff at home and have an office which at any one point can only accommodate 30% of the entire staff you have might become a reality very soon. So both of those factors, one for commercial, one for residential real estate, make me very averse to buying anything related to real estate. So it would not just mean, you know, listed real estate companies, but ancillary businesses of all kinds. In China, we saw the phenomenon of revenge buying. So once the lockdown ended completely, people came out by the hundreds and bought cheap two-wheelers. They bought cheap cars, the cars which cost $5,000 or $10,000, cars in that range. And people in a pandemic kind of environment, I'm not saying that, we will have many pandemics in the future, but I don't think that should be ruled out either. Now that people have witnessed this, I think people would be a lot happier. People would be a lot happier sitting in their own car and driving to work, or, sitting on their bike or bicycle, whatever be it, versus using public transport. So I would make a case for people moving from public transport back to privately owned vehicles. It could be anything from a bicycle to a supercar, but I like auto companies based on that. I like auto companies. I like auto ancillary companies, which have been beaten down a lot based on the falling demand in the pandemic. Pharma companies are great, but they have, as we all know, run up a lot already. I don't know how much room there is left there. But between Infosys, Reliance is a sector of its own now. I mean, the way they have scaled up. Auto companies, maybe a little bit of high quality pharma. I think these are the sectors I like. Yeah.
What do you think about the education sector, Nikhil, if I may ask? Nikhil, yeah.
Again, I would say that the most innovative of companies in education. Sorry, guys, just give me a second. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the most innovative of companies in education, again, are not listed. I think that's a big problem. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Nikhil.
One of them would be Q-Shala, isn't it, Nikhil?
Yeah, we just
Let's
just made an investment.
We've been following that.
No, we missed out on so many opportunities. A lot of my friends put money in Unacademy.
Yeah,
we didn't catch that. I think that was a big miss.
Yeah, very honest of you, Nikhil.
Yeah.
Sushila, would you want to come in with your question?
Yeah. Hello, Nikhil.
Hi.
How to maintain our emotional balance while trading?
Right. I'll give you a very candid answer, but it's also the best answer, I think. Don't look at your profits and losses. Make the investment after thorough research and then forget about it. Don't look at how much you're up, how much you're down. Not on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. When you do that for long enough, I think you'll start paying less and less attention to the intermediate profit and losses of things.
Thank you.
Sridhi?
Hi, Nikhil.
Hi.
So, Nikhil, SEBI has recently come up with a law that multi-cap funds need to necessarily invest a certain amount in small cap and mid cap. So, how do you see that affecting the larger market?
Can you please repeat that for me? Sorry.
So, SEBI has come up with a rule that...
SEBI has come up with a rule that?
Multi-cap funds need to allocate a certain amount in small cap and mid-cap stocks. So how do you see this playing out in the market? How do you see it affecting the market?
It's a good thing, right? More money going into mid-cap and small-cap companies is a good thing.
So do we see the correction in the large caps then?
I don't think so. There are a lot of global funds which follow indexes like the MSCI, and they are mandated to invest in large cap companies. I think that number is growing very quickly. So I don't think good for mid cap necessarily means bad for large cap. I think there is ample liquidity flowing into the large caps as well. Right now we have America, which is printing as much money as they are. And a lot of the residual money will find its way into India and into different companies.
Thank you. Jyoti? Jyoti Barlia?
Yeah, I'm there. Hi, Nikhil.
Hi.
Yeah, so I was interested in knowing that do you earn more through intraday traders or by more through value investors, which gives you more business?
Intraday traders, any day. I mean, we don't charge anything for investors, right? We're absolutely free. So if you buy something today and don't sell on the same day, we don't charge anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Nikhil, you had Zerodha, which disrupted Fin. You had TrueBeacon, which disrupted the asset management. You have Coin. You have Rainmatter. What's next, Nikhil? What are you planning to disrupt this time round?
I have no idea. I don't think TrueBeacon or Coin, Zerodha has.
Yes.
But I think it's too early for TrueBeacon. Coin has done exceptionally well, but we have not monetized it. We don't really make any money from Coin.
Okay.
I think the next thing we are really looking forward to is, I would say, A, asset management, and B, I would say broking in other geographies outside of India. So it would be maybe America or even Southeast Asia. Some countries have very deep markets. So that's a part of our focus right now.
So Nikhil, people, they compare you to Robinhood. Do you want to put that to rest?
Yeah, I mean, I think we began much before Robinhood. We started, I think, a good 5-6 years.
They started 2013, I think.
Yeah, but you have to understand structurally, we operate in completely different markets. So Robinhood makes a significant portion. Robinhood makes a significant portion of their revenue by selling order flow, which you can't do in India. So all the order matching in India happens on the exchanges platforms. A broker is a hop between a client and the exchange. But in America, what I can do is I can, as a broker, run a dark pool myself. If Namita is my client and Rachna is a client, Namita wants to sell stock A and Rachna wants to buy the same stock, I can match that at the broker level. But that's not allowed in India. So structurally, we are very different companies. They make most of their money from dark pools and selling order flows and stuff like that. We make our revenues more from typical traditional broking.
Rachna Bhagat.
Hi,
she's having network problem.
I think she's on mute. Rachna, you're on mute. I'll ask her a question with your permission. Yeah. Nikhil, Rachna wants to know, is cryptocurrency on your radar?
Personally, not on mine. I mean, they've run up so much of late that the prices look ridiculous to me. But B, you know how hard our government came down on cryptos. They, in fact, kind of blanket banned banks from dealing with cryptos themselves. We work in an ecosystem where we are regulated by 20 different bodies. And, for the fact that we have taken away the broking pie, wherein people used to charge 10 times as much as us and make 10 times the amount of money, we have very, very many enemies already. I don't want to, touch anything which is in the gray area. So I stay away from cryptos.
Not a smart move, isn't it, Nikhil? Paridhi, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, Nikhil. I wanted to know, some of the larger fund managers, they still believe in keeping the powder dry, as they call it. What is your take on that?
Keeping the powder dry in what sense, though?
They're still they're still thinking the market will bottom out some more. What is your take on that?
Well, personally, I'll be candid here again. Like in my funds right now, I'm hedged to the extent of about 80% of the portfolio. So I have only a 20% naked exposure in the market. So if the markets go up 10 rupees today, I will only make 2 rupees, but the same when the markets go down. So that is fairly conservative, even from my standpoint. So I would quite agree with them, but as a fund manager of an equity fund, a vanilla equity fund, it's very hard to pull that off, because if you miss the bus, you will always be running behind that 10-20% alpha which came by.
Yes. Thank you.
Meghna, you had a question, another one?
Yes. Thank you, Namita. So, Nikhil, I wanted to ask, given the pain the pandemic is causing, the economical pain, how do you see AMC sector in general, like from the biggies like HDFC, AMC to, you know, any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot outside the pandemic first, a lot of what is happening regulation-wise, wherein people are curtailing how much money you can make upfront, how much fees you can front load, to cap how much a distributor can make. All of these are good for the end user, the retail investor, the typical, by retail investor, I mean a middle class guy who's earning 50,000 rupees a month and he has 1 lakh rupee or 2 lakh rupees saved at the end of the year. Anything that can be done to benefit him, I think is good. It's par for the course. It kind of makes the ecosystem larger, more robust, and this investor will stay on and keep coming back for the rest of his life.
Right.
In terms of the pandemic alone, we're seeing a significant shift from people going into the AMCs or finding a fund manager to manage your money. It could be for a whole host of reasons, but people are investing on their own. I would wager a guess and say the amount of time one has at home today, the amount of excess time has a large part to play with it. But people are also sick of how many fees they've been charged, how badly fund managers have done in the last 10 years or 15 years. If I were to give you an example, actively managed funds have underperformed the benchmark in 85% of the.
You got muted, Nikhil. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So if you were to just buy the exchange and leave it, you would have done better than 85% of fund managers. So I think people are kind of like recognizing that fact and preferring to invest on their own directly right now, which is fair, I think. I mean,
Thank you for the insight, Nikhil.
Yeah.
Swati?
Hi, Nikhil. Nikhil, agri sector is prospering. So what do you think of the agrochemical sector?
I don't very well understand the sector.
We can't hear you.
Sorry, I don't very well understand the sector. Agri-tech as a sector is doing fairly well. If I have to give you a broader perspective of how I view the sector. Sorry, guys. Sorry for the disturbance. My phone continues to ring. So if I have to give you a broader perspective of the sector.
Aisha.
Sorry, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Okay, if I have to give you a broader perspective of the sector, I would say we are still a country which is largely very fragmented when it comes to farming. I think we have many farmers, but with very, very small parcels of land. We would in all likelihood follow the model of the West, wherein there is consolidation and there are companies which come in and aggregate thousands of farmers. When that happens, I think there will be a lot of benefit for people in the agri-tech space because it makes it easier for an agri-tech company to reach farmers who have significant scale and the capex capabilities available to adopt the technologies that they might have.
Jyoti Wadhwa. Meghna, have you been able to get her?
Yeah. Hi, Nikhil. Sorry on this thing. Taking the same thing forward, what are your views on specialty chemicals? And are they overrated or still there is a lot of juice to come in?
I don't really track Hi, Jyoti. I don't really track specialty chemicals all that closely. As a rule of thumb, I like to stay away from companies that are as expensive as specialty chemicals. But I wouldn't be the best opinion you can get on that company in that industry. I think it's not one of my favorite industries or companies to track.
Okay, thanks.
Nikhil, I have a question in the chat box. Somebody wants me to ask you, what do you think about the FMCG sector? You know, seems to be the darling of the bosses, but what is your personal take on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are very few plays in FMCG. There has been consolidation which has happened here in Amita. I think if you were to consider ITC, Hindustan Unilever, Britannia, Nestle, a common trait between all of them is they are very, very expensive. ITC I hold a little bit of Nestle. I will tell you guys a very funny investment method. So traditionally, when you were to backtest data and go back a significant number of years, if you ignore all other metrics of a company, forget fundamentals, forget technicals, forget financials, look at the last traded price of the stock and pick stuff which is trading at 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees or whatever, and just buy that. That has outperformed the index overall. I like Nestle from that parameter much more than I like it from the fundamental parameter. I think the reasoning behind this trading system is the not smart money, let me not call it dumb money, but not smart money typically tends to operate in the stocks which are trading between 50 rupees and 200 rupees or 300 rupees. And it's very easy for smart money to come and take the other side and wipe them out. But these same people, for some reason, perceive that a stock with a higher traded price is more expensive, and they do not venture into companies like a Nestle. From that perspective, I like Nestle, and I end up buying companies which have, not just in India, but even in the US, if you see companies doing trading at $2,000, $5,000 a stock, these things typically outperform. There is no rational reasoning behind this. It's more, how the past has played out. When it comes to ITC, they still make, I think, 65% of their revenues and 80% of their profits from cigarettes alone. And that as a sector, I think I'm very bearish about. I think less people will smoke in 10 years than they do today. There will be twice as much taxes around cigarettes as there are today, with more research in how detrimental it might be to one's health. So I'm not a big fan of ITC from that parameter. Britannia, I don't quite love the management. I'm not a fan of the family or the company managing the company, so I stay away from it. So if I have to say, Dabur is a reasonably well-run company. So if I had to pick, I would say Dabur and Nestle are decent.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, Nikhil, I don't even know where this 1 hour has gone with so many questions, so many insights, and so many smart statements from your side. One of the best teachers in the stock market is the stock market itself. Very profound, so many interesting things. Thank you so much, Nikhil. And I'm going to hand you over to Rachna. Thanks.
Nikhil, before we sign off, I would like to know your comments on Warren Buffett, if you track Mr. Buffett, because we do, and we've attended the AGM also of Berkshire Hathaway last year. Yeah, 29 of us, we went to attend the AGM. And he has recently invested in an IPO, then in a gold mining company. So your comments.
Right. I love what he did in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s. I think his system of investing worked very well back then. But today, I'm no longer sure. I don't quite agree with his bet of buying airlines. A bunch of the stuff he has done over the last couple of years, I'm not a big fan of. Even him buying carbonated drinks, many bets that he has made recently, I am not such a big fan of. I think we've been in a long-term bull cycle when Buffett has been alive. I mean, we saw the 2008 correction, but it was not a deep depression per se. It lasted maybe a very short while before there was a significant rebound. I think given a long-term bear trend, say the 1929s or during the World War in 1939 or 1940, times like that, I think a Buffett's methodology of investing would underperform versus all others. I would always say, the most important thing about investing is diversification. I think it's very, very important. You might have the best quality companies, but if you have 100 rupees of free cash as your savings that you have room to allocate, definitely have 30 bucks or 35 bucks of risk-free fixed income. By risk-free, I mean, tax-free bonds, government securities. Have another 20, 30 bucks of commodities in your portfolio. Have a crude, have a gold. Gold is a great hedge because it's inversely proportional to the stock markets, and gold will do well when there is uncertainty and there's a lot of volatility in the markets. So definitely have a very, very diversified portfolio. I think I agree with, like I said, Buffett at different times, and I disagree with him at different times. But he's a legend. I agree, and I get why you guys like him as much as you do.
Yeah.
So
can we expect that Zerodha is going to be the next Berkshire Hathaway in the making?
Completely different businesses. I don't think, who could you compare us to? I think if you have to compare us to someone, it had to be like a Charles Schwab in the US, who has $1 trillion of client money, not necessarily under management, but in terms of the entire ecosystem. Because we're not necessarily trying to go the Buffet model. I think we're trying to be a end-to-end
No, I'm talking about the scale, not the model exactly.
I mean, if you're going to tell me I'm going to have anything close to the amount of money he has, bring it on, Rachna. I'm very, very happy to hear that.
But you're on the right track. That's why we can assume, right?
Yeah, it's more like an ant, following an elephant and looking behind him to see if there's someone else there.
Again, you're being modest, Nikhil. Thank you so much, Nikhil. And that was a lesson on the, I would say, new dimension of investing altogether, minus the trading and focusing on value investing. This is for my members. And Nikhil, we've certainly broadened our perspectives in this session. And it's reassuring to see that young Indians like you being the driving force for the Indian economy. Thank you so much. And we all wish you even greater success ahead. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for having me. Bye. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.